There we go. Hopefully this doesn't crash. What's up, Boston Reefers Society members? Tonight we have a special guest with us. Vinny Altamirano from GHL has graciously agreed to give us a look into the world of aquarium automation and talk shop with us. Vinny is the North American representative for GHL USA, for those of you that don't know. With over 20 years of experience in designing and maintaining saltwater aquariums, Vinny applies his passion for aquariums, science, and technology by helping aquarists build aquarium systems that are both reliable and as self-sustaining as possible. At the core of it all, he is a die-hard hobbyist who loves to help hobbyists and just talk reef. So for those of that you don't know, there's Vinny from GHL, and yeah, basic BS or whatever, talking shop. And I discussed a little bit yesterday, and
Yep.
soup to nuts. I kind of gave you my sob story and all that, crap that whatever, but it is what it is. So I'm sure anybody that's watching or will watch this later, wants to know, how'd you get into reef keeping? Like what were the first steps? Was someone influential? Did you start freshwater, et cetera, or did you just dive head first into the saltwater side?
Yeah. Well, let me first start things off by saying it's a pleasure to be here. So nice to meet you all. So to answer your question, Paul, my aquarium journey started about 20 years ago. And it did not start with saltwater, it started with freshwater. Like many people who eventually found saltwater. So my tank was a 29-gallon freshwater tank. I had that system for about a year or so. And had it not been for a friend of a relative breaking down their tank, I would have never really thought that I would get into saltwater. So one year into having this freshwater tank, I get offered the opportunity to take a 55-gallon acrylic tank. So I figured, what the heck? It's free. I will give it a try. And as a 14-year-old kid, I just went headfirst with what I thought was a big tank. And that 55-gallon tank was the very first time I started things out in the saltwater world. And that was a pretty rough start. For the first couple years, algae galore. I was still learning what were the what kind of equipment someone should have. I always went for the least expensive options, only to find out that I had to buy 3 times until I found the right product that actually did what was expected. In the process of having this tank, I found Reef Central, and that is where I started really learning a whole bunch of things about the hobby. During that time, I also worked at a local fish shop, where I also got some experience working, face to face with people and getting more hands-on experience with the hobby, learning the do's and don'ts of maintaining an aquarium. And I also became a part of a reef club in Connecticut. They're called the Connecticut Area Reef Society. And back then, that club was super small. So it was, I believe that club was no more than 15, 20 members. And it was so small that we used to have monthly meetings over there at people's houses. So they would open up their houses and we would all hang out in the host's house, check out the tank, and just talk reef. And in that process, we would also have little frag swaps here and there. And I remember one meeting, that's where I was handed down my first piece of coral. It was a Xenia. And I was nervous about keeping it because it was my first piece of coral. I figured, this probably won't go well. But lo and behold, it held on just fine. And this tank that I had running, still the 55-gallon, was running with nothing more than tap water dechlorinator and salt mix. So big red flags in saltwater reef keeping. In that club, I also learned about the importance of running an RO unit. So it didn't take long for me to buy one of those and start using that. And once I did, that's when I started seeing things improve. So fast forward, that 55-gallon tank was up and running for, I want to say, 2.5 years. I upgraded to a 75-gallon tank, and that tank became a mixed reef. The plan was to start it as a mixed reef. 2 years after having that tank running, it slowly evolved into into SPS dominant tank. I quickly learned that that is the type of coral that I like to keep. I like the challenge. I like the unique growth formations that those corals take on. Um, as far as equipment and lighting goes, by the time that 75-gallon tank came around, I had a good skimmer. I had a Deltex skimmer. I was using metal halides. Um, I pretty much went all out. And that 75-gallon tank was what first uh, exposed me to the benefits of reef automation, not just in the sense of an aquarium controller, but also dosing pumps. Because you have a doser. That's a form of automation right then and there. Um, I started off with a what was it called? An aqua controller. I think it was the aqua controller junior, and I was playing around with that, and I really saw the benefits of it. And right then and there, I knew that controller was going to be having that controller just took a lot of weight off my shoulders. And I really, really got to see the benefits of just having one on the tank. Um, what else? That tank was up and running for about actually for about five years. And then when that tank came down, I had moved and I had downgraded a little bit. I went with a 67-gallon custom tank from a tank manufacturer in Canada. The name doesn't come to
Miracles?
mind right now. Yeah, Miracles, that's them. Yeah, so Miracles made the tank for me, and that tank was running for quite a while. And from the start, that tank was just acros, full of acros, full of I had my Proflux controller. By then, I had found GHL, and I was using their Proflux 2 controller. Later on, upgraded to a Proflux 3, and in that time, I also used their dosing pumps. Um, I used their float switches and other accessories that come with the controller. That tank is when I also started dabbling with LED lighting. At the time, the consensus about LED lighting was that if you're going to grow SPS, LED lighting is not the way to go. But I like a challenge, so I put the GHL Mitras, the LX6. This is the very first light that GHL came out with. So I put the LX6 over the tank. I put a single light. The tank that I had was a 3 foot by 2 foot space, and surprisingly, that single fixture covered the entire space. I didn't need anything more than that. But as the corals grew, I learned that one fixture in the long run is just not enough. You start to run into shading issues and shadows and whatnot. So eventually, the LX7 came out, and sure enough, I put two of them on my tank, and that's when I started really seeing a huge improvement in the consistency of the growth rate and the coral and the color of the corals. Um, and yeah, and now fast forward to today, I'm living in California because I'm originally from Connecticut. That's where I first discovered the hobby and really uh, deep dive into the world of reef keeping. So now I'm in California, and the tank that's behind me has been running for about 2.5 years now, and it's completely fitted with all GHL equipment, with the exception of the skimmer because GHL doesn't make skimmers. And yeah, that's basically the run through of my hobby and the tanks that I've been through for the past 20 years.
Just sharing your Instagram if anyone wanted to go take a look and see some of the amazing corals you have up there.
Yeah,
Um,
thanks.
All right, so we covered how you get into the, there's a good one. What type of failures have you encountered over the years?
Many,
Yeah,
a
same.
lot. Yeah, with the 55-gallon tank, this tank that I acquired was not drilled, so I had to deal with those hang on back overflow boxes, and I can't tell you how many times I've had to mop the floor because of an overflow. Uh, the siphon breaks and it becomes a mess on the floor.
Oh yeah,
Um,
fun times.
yeah, that was one of the failures with that system. Second failure being just not staying on top of dosing and the amounts that you're actually dosing into the tank. Uh, I find that, and I'm still guilty of this to this day. Sometimes, you set your dosing pumps to dose X amount every day, and I fail to realize that, as these corals grow, their demands grow with it. So if you're dosing X amount of alkalinity today, 6 months from now, the corals are going to be bigger, but what you were dosing before is no longer enough. And back then there was no automated alkalinity testing devices. Thankfully, nowadays we have a whole bunch of options at our disposal. But before, we didn't know that was happening unless we're super religious about manually testing with our test kits. But if that wasn't done, then we really wouldn't know until it was quite possibly too late. Corals, the colors just start fading, or you start seeing some bleaching events and whatnot. So that just not staying on top of the dosing amounts and keeping up with the necessary changes that need to be made as the corals grow. Third failure would probably be not being consistent with water changes. I am a big believer in water changes. I don't like to do single larger water changes. I just see that as playing with fire because it's a fine line. The coral's already accustomed to certain tank conditions. You go do a big water change and suddenly you're kind of throwing a wrench into the operation. Corals have to reacclimate to the new conditions. So what I do, especially with the tank that I have now, is I use the GHL 2.2 Maxi doser. I use that to handle my automatic water changes, and those water changes happen 3 times a week. So I'll pull out on average about 15 gallons a week. Nothing huge. The tank behind me is a 90-gallon display. It's the Red Sea 425 G2. So all in all, it's about a 110-gallon system. I'm pulling about a little bit more than 10% every week, and I find that that's enough. The coral. I'm happy with the way the corals look. Corals look happy, and I just leave it alone. My only responsibility as far as water changes is manually mix the salt water. I have a dedicated mixing station, and pull the salt water from the vat to the water change reservoir. I'll show you in a moment. I'll give you guys a walkthrough of what equipment I have on that tank. You get a better picture of how things look in the system.
Nice.
Yeah, those would be the failures.
So these are all I'm sure you've got these from a million people over the years. Like, where do you like to keep your your parameters, and where do you reckon them to be for other people's systems? I know
Mm-hmm.
there's no magic number because I'm sure with the 8 of us
Yeah,
here, we all have different numbers and different
everyone's going to give
results.
you a different answer.
Yeah.
So with me being a diehard acro freak, I will give you ideal parameters for those types of corals. I think across the board, pH, keep it. Try to prevent it from dipping below 8.2. But if you can go 8.4, even 8.5, not many people can get it to that point. Corals will really start to grow a lot quicker. As far as calcium, anywhere between 400 and 450. Alkalinity, I keep this tank anywhere between 8 and 8.5. Sometimes it goes a little bit higher to 8.6. No big deal there. Magnesium, say around 1350 to 1450. Magnesium is not really one of those parameters that I emphasize too heavily on because It's just not. It's just not as critical, in my opinion, as pH, alk, and calcium. Potassium. I do test for potassium from time to time. That I like to keep at least 400 or 410. As far as the what else do we have? Temperature, the basics. My target temp is 77. I found that with the warmer waters, and I learned this went back when I had the 75-gallon tank. I did not have the space for a chiller. I only had room for a fan, and back then, my mother would not let me run the AC because it would drive up that electric bill to no end. So my tank would normally average at around 83, 84. And it was a tank full of acros. I saw so much algae growth, but every time I wiped that glass clean, I also saw new growth tips along with it. So that made me comfortable with the idea of if this tank behind me was to climb from 77 to 80, 81, I'm not going to sweat it. Because it's not like your temperature is going to shoot from 77 to 81 in a matter of a couple hours. These things happen very slowly, and it's slow enough that in most cases the corals will adapt to that. That's not to say though that if you hit 85, 86, you won't run into problems, because you will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of our members, one of the founders, Greg Hiller, he
Mhm.
talks about it all the time. Like, it's common for his tank to be 83, 84 degrees. I'm like freaking out. I get the Profilux as well, and the temperature set that if it hits 82, like, it'll kill 6 bulbs on, one system, and it'll turn some
Yep.
lights and channels down on another, et cetera, et cetera. But, um, my mixer station's in the garage, and it's been hot here to like 90 degrees, 100% humidity the last couple of days. And I don't do water changes personally. Like, I'll run, I run Reef Moonshiner's like method or program. So it's like daily
Yep.
dosing, trace and stuff like that. And so one of the things I have to deal with is, from fragging and selling coral, or, just evaporation, like specific gravity dropping from like skimming, stuff like that. Is I used to, and this kind of bit me in the butt about 18 months ago. So I used to put a cup of salt in the sump and let it gradually raise. Well, it worked fine when I didn't have a refugium set up. And then the next time I stuck it next to the skimmer, and it like shot the output of the water from the skimmer into that cup and dissolved like 3 cups of salt. And I'm yelling at my daughters and my father, what the hell are you guys spraying in the air? And, literally killed like 60, 70 high-end pieces of acro. And I was like, then I realized what I did. So now I'll make salt water and I'll just top off. I won't run the A2 for a few days. So I'll just top off. But I dumped like 3 gallons in there yesterday, and it went from like 77.9 to like 84 degrees. And I was like, holy hell.
Yeah, that's dangerous.
I probably should have tested the tank, at least the new salt water going in before. But yeah, I know a lot of people don't have problems, with their tanks rising in temperature, to a certain extent. But
I gotta
yeah,
say, my tank's been pretty hot these past few days. I mean, with the heat wave, mine's been creeping up. Like, usually it's around 77, kind of like you said, and I'm hitting like 80s, but things are looking good. I got a little cyano right now, and that's one thing I noticed. Like you said, algae growth like a lot quicker at that high temp. Like bacteria too is what I've noticed. Like just grows a lot faster, kind of coats everything a little bit quicker. If you don't mind, I'm Dylan, by the way. I have a quick question. You mentioned you do auto water changes, like 3 times a week. So what's your setup for that look like, and why did you choose auto water change versus like a continuous water change, like a daily type thing?
As far as what my setup looks like, I have in this apartment, we have many closets, so I had to use one of the closets and turn it into a fish closet. That closet has I believe it's a 35-gallon square vat. That's where I hold all my salt water. I chose to do automatic instead of continuous because of just the layout of my apartment. I don't have the luxury of, running a continuous feed from my RO to the mixing tank. It's a space issue more than anything.
Okay.
Yeah. Otherwise, I would have been all over that. I would have definitely done that. So I use a 15-gallon reservoir to hold my ready to use salt water, so that when it's time to do these automatic water changes, the maxi doser is pulling from that reservoir. With the controller, I have a continuously monitoring how much water is in that reservoir. So once it hits, the near empty point, I'll get a ping to my phone, and it'll tell me, hey, your container is running low. That'll then prompt me to do to just fill it up again.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I like to do 3 times versus every day, only because if I do it 3 times, I've got 4 days to refill it in case life happens and I just don't get around to it. So
Definitely.
I have 4 days to refill it, and I find that method has worked out for me for the past couple of years.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Do you add any type of additives, or do you spot feed? Do you use coral food, or do you just go the tried and true fish poop method?
All the above.
All the above, yeah.
I have in this tank, I have a total of 18 dosing pumps.
Wow.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that there's 18 different supplements that I dose, because that would just be excessive in my opinion. But I do, as far as supplements, I put in, the usual calcium, alkalinity, magnesium. I'll put in a 3-bottle trace element set from Fauna Marin. The product is called Color Elements. Maybe you guys have heard of it. Uh, that that's on a dosing. Those 3 are on dosing pumps. I'll also put in another Fauna Marin product called Bacto Energy. It's basically a nitrate reducing liquid. Because I tend to feed heavy when the fish feeding and chloral feeding comes around, my nitrates tend to shoot up. So by dosing Bacto Energy on a dosing pump, it just helps prevent the nitrates from spiking too high. I like to keep my nitrates between 5 and 15. I'm not too strict with it. I find that once the nitrate gets to 20, I start to see more algae growth. So I try to keep it between 5 and 15. What else do I dose? The other 2 dosing pump heads are used for my water change. So one pump pulls the old water out from the tank, the other pump puts the new water in. I use another dosing pump for auto top off. And then I use 3 dosing pump heads to feed and to run the KH director, and then another 3 pumps to run the ion director. And then I've got a few pump heads that aren't being used for anything. They're just there in case I want to do a little bit of experimenting and try out a new product. Yep.
Do you dose iodine at all?
I use Lugol's. So
Yeah.
it's not a dosing pump. I just put in 3-4 drops a couple times a week. I'm not super strict about that.
Yeah.
I guess we can call that another one of my failures. Not being as consistent with the manual dosing. I have to admit that I've gotten very spoiled with the convenience of having all these dosers taking care of those things for me. But I do still manually dose Lugol's iodine. I put in another Fauna Marin product called Min S. It's a very heavily concentrated coral food. Even the fish will go nuts for it. It's almost like a paste. I'll put that in every couple days, and everything just opens up within a few minutes of it hitting the water. And then I'll just feed the fish, and from time to time I'll put in a few oyster eggs, frozen cubes, into the
Yeah.
tank.
Yeah, it seems that the more, I don't know how I word it, the more serious like SPS keepers that I talk to, it seems to be like oyster feast is being dosed, or some type of oyster cube or something like that. Like I was saying, I run Reef Moonshiners method. There's a couple of us here that do as well. So there's no water changes. So it's like tough adding certain things that are going to spike, certain parameters. I have a 100-gallon display and an 80-gallon freg tank with a common sump, right? So it's like roughly about 175 gallons. And I have a good sized triggerfish, couple little crap chromis and stuff like that, but I have, for the majority, like, utilitarian fish, like tangs and stuff like that. And they're all big sizes and they devour everything and anything that I throw at the tank. And at one point, like last year, and again, because there's no nutrient export other than the skimmer, my nitrates were like 100. And I was like, oh my God, I'm like, how do I get them down? How do I get them down? And I ended up buying a Jurassic clam. We had a frag show, last November or an event or whatever. And, I put a little Jurassic clam, always wanted one, never tried my hand at them. Like some people like, oh, they'll live forever. And other people like, oh, I, spent $300 and it was dead next week, and the week after or whatever. But, that thing was a game changer in like nutrients. Like I literally went from like 97 parts per million to like 4 in a matter of 8 months, something like that. And sometimes I don't regularly test. Like I'll be that lazy reefer and say, like I have the calcium reactor on there, and I'm like, oh, ALK's good, and I also send out, like roughly every 6 to 8 weeks, I'll send out like an ATI or a Oshimo ICP test, and that's part of the reef moonshiners method on how to make your corrections and adjust what's lacking and stuff like that. And I just lost my train of thought, of course. Oh, the nerves got me. But yeah, I don't know, man. Like I don't know where the hell I was going with that story. Sorry, folks. Brain dead over here. Yeah, what's some key pieces of advice that you feel most marina careers would benefit from?
I think just the benefits of automating things. I know I feel like there's a misconception of when somebody says automation and controllers, it's almost like a very blanket statement. But I feel like when you deep dive into what that really means, there's more to it than just the control aspects of it. Like dosing pumps, dosing pumps, you don't have to get crazy with a full-on controller, but if you put in a dosing pump, you'll see benefits from doing that because it's more weight off your shoulder. For the guys that are tuned in and have dosing pumps, you guys already know how useful it is to just have one on the tank. The aspect of controllers, when you buy a controller, it does primarily 2 things: it monitors and it controls. But the third aspect of it is the reliability of it. At the end of the day, why do you buy a controller? It's to maintain your tank for both monitoring and automation purposes. Any controller you look at, it's not necessarily inexpensive, especially if you want all the bells and whistles. So the one thing that sets a controllers apart from the other is the reliability part of it. You buy a controller obviously for the automation and the automation part of it, but you also buy it because it becomes the heartbeat of your tank. If that goes down, then and you're not there to catch it, then mayhem happens. So when I've tried other types of controllers out there. I'm not going to say any names. And I've ran into my share of issues. And this is before I ever became involved with GHL. Afterwards, when I came across the Profilux, I was intrigued because I am very much into technology and hardware. Any little techie gadgets that I can put into the tank, I'm gonna really want to try it because I just want to, I want to be as well versed as possible and then get as much exposure to what options we have in this industry as far as control and automation goes. So when I came across the Profilux controller, I tried it out and I liked what I saw. And still, this is before I even became involved with GHL. I liked what I saw. I liked the way it worked. The logic behind it made sense to me. And once I said it, I just didn't have to really keep looking back and wondering, is everything okay? Is everything okay? Whereas before, I had to always check on it because I was a little skeptical. Because sometimes when something goes wrong with a piece of equipment, it's you're almost subconsciously expecting it to go wrong again because if it happens once, it might happen again. So with the Profilus controller, I never had that feeling or that level of concern with it. I just knew that when I set it up, it just did what it was supposed to do. It did exactly how you programmed it to function. Um, yeah, I kind of lost my train of thought there too. Hey,
Welcome to my
that's a little
world.
contagious.
Right as you started talking, I was like, oh, I know what I was talking about, being lazy with testing my tank, like go figure. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
crazy. Somebody, I don't know, Doug or Chris asked me earlier today, they were like, oh, where's your ALCAT or something? And I'm like, the hell do I know? I think it's like 8.2. I haven't tested like probably a month because, I just get, I get the calcium reactor on there, and for the most part, it stays steady. You don't ever,
Yeah.
once you dial it in the calcium reactor, it seems like you don't have to change it much unless, you obviously your media depletes or, you swap in CO2 or whatever. And I was just thinking the other day, I'm like, I have a whiteboard that's like to the left of my frag system, 2 feet away. And the last date that I wrote on it, like what my common parameters were, was like 2.5 months ago. And I was like, yeah, I should probably check, test just for the hell of it.
Yeah.
I kind of rely a little more on the ICP testing, you know what I mean? Like, could I be a little more, whatever, more in tune with things? Because I say this to Chris and to Doug and a couple of the other guys, like with me, I mean, it's cool, like everything's growing, but I think I like the challenge of like setting stuff up, like I'm already, I've been thinking about a new build for a while. I don't have the money for, $7,000 to $10,000 aquarium and, this and that. And but I like the planning out. You get the cool colored pipe and the
Oh yeah.
Schedule 80 fittings that you don't need, but they look good because they're gray and
Yeah.
et cetera, et cetera. And planning out the pots, and then I get everything set up and everything's good and things are growing. And now it's a hurry up and wait game. I got some SBS that are like this big, and then I got some that are still the size of my pinky nail,
Yeah.
and it's like, what the hell, but
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, there's everything and anything in this hobby, for somebody. Now I've been thinking about doing like maybe like a little Red Sea desktop peninsula or something species specific, whether it's like an anglerfish or, try my hand at like seahorses or something, something that I'd see at like the local pet store, like where I grew up. I used to get off the bus from school and I'd go in there and like, before they brought in saltwater stuff, I used to watch them feed the goldfish to like the groupers and the pacu or whatever they call it,
Mhm.
big fish. And, it's always been that type of thing. There's always something interesting regardless of what it is.
Yeah.
Maybe a
Yeah.
macroalgae tank. Who knows,
Yeah.
who
There's
knows?
always something new to explore in this hobby.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
You kind of touched already on, like some of the automation things that you do. This is one of the questions one of the guys had is like, what's some of the more common automation in program mistakes that people make when setting things up?
I'd say
Read the manual first.
I'd say setting up the something like a heater.
Yeah.
Like a heater as uh as important as that part of automation is. I see sometimes people make their control settings too narrow. And what that will do is that will have their outlets switching on and off so frequently that it's just not good for the hardware. Um, Granted, our power bars are heavy duty and they're built to withstand that type of usage, but there's really no added benefit to having that type of narrow level of control. On my system personally, I have my temperature fluctuate half a degree. So my target is 77. Once it hits 70, 76 and a half, it kicks on and then it turns off at 77. I've seen some people have it so tight where once it drops, if their target is 77 and it drops to 66.8, it's kicking on. And that's that narrow range of control is so tight that there's really no added benefit, but it comes at a cost of just putting more wear and tear on your heater and the outlet that it's plugged into. Another thing would be dosing schedules. You know, sometimes, and it really comes down to exactly what is being dosed. If sometimes people will put in too much alkalinity in one shot.
Huh.
If they have a big tank and it calls for, let's say, 200 mils that the tank requires, I've seen people put in 200 mils in one shot. And I mean, I guess it comes down to personal preference. But in my opinion, I find that to be a little bit risky because you're literally putting in 200 mils of concentrated alk, and if that alk is not mixed well enough by the time it hits by the time it circulates to the return pump compartment, then you're just exposing the corals to this concentrated pocket of alk.
Mm-hmm.
Granted, it doesn't stay concentrated for long in such a big volume of water, but it doesn't really help matters either. So what I always suggest to people, regardless of what size tank or how much their tank needs on a daily basis, spread it out. Spread it out over the day. By the end of the 24-hour period, you're still putting in the same amount of mils. It's just spaced out so that it's easier on the coral. Yeah, that would be another thing that I've caught through the years.
I worked at a local fish store for 2 years, and that was one of the things that I noticed about, one of the biggest problems when people get controllers is it can almost stress them out more because they're trying to keep everything so narrow. It's like, no, that's not the point. The point is to like make it easier for you. But yeah, like some people, especially when you combine the dosers and like the automatic testing, trying to keep the alkalinity like right at 8, like 24 hours a day. It's like that's not really realistic. Or like calcium and magnesium levels, just the margin of error on the test itself. It's like it might shift a little bit, but like it's not going to kill anything. Everything's still going to be growing. It's going to be fine.
Right.
Definitely had people like obsessing over it, like trying to like narrow it down, pinpoint.
Yeah, and like you said, Dylan, I find that having a controller is a double-edged sword. Like you said, people buy it because they are searching for stability, but sometimes it's so easy to get caught up in the numbers that mentally you're just fixated on, I want 8.0 for ALK. It's got to be 8.0. Anything less than that, something is wrong. That it causes unnecessary stress. It's very easy for someone who's never had a controller before, it's very easy to be overwhelmed because when somebody tells you it can do X, Y, and Z and many more things, yeah, it sounds great on paper and when somebody's telling it to you, but then when you're actually sitting down and you're doing it, it's easy to get overwhelmed because if you don't have someone guiding you, tell you, okay, these set up the basics first. Temperature control, cooling control, skimmer control, feed pauses. These are things that I consider the basics. If no one is there to guide a new controller user to do these type of basic things, then it's like the people are blind. They don't really know where to start because the controller can do so much.
Yeah.
So that's why, like, when I write the articles in the knowledge base, I think about it from the hobbyist perspective. First, cover the basics. What does somebody new to a controller want to do in the very beginning? Set up things like their temperature, or maybe set up their fans or their chillers, set up pH control if somebody has a calcium reactor, things like that. Later on, once people grow more accustomed to the basics of controlling their tank, maybe they want to explore the more moderate to advanced side of the controller. That's when they could probably use the help of the articles that we have in our knowledge base. So that's why we have things like that there for that. But yeah, with a controller, it's very easy to get overwhelmed. But one of the things that we do, especially with our controller, is when somebody takes it out of the box, they just download the app, and the app will literally tell you what to do from A to Z to get you connected to the controller. And from then and there, you can go to our knowledge base, and we'll give you a roadmap of the basics that most people will likely want to do with their controller. And then from there, they can just build on that, or just leave it as it is.
You know the guy on Reef to Reef, he's in like Sweden, Lassie, or
Yeah,
yeah, he's
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 a
he's all
fantastic
shit.
racer.
Dude, he's like soup to nuts. So
He's a
Yeah.
chef.
I was trying to figure out, like, I know hysteresis is like, the ebb and flow of, like sine wave or something. To my mind, that doesn't, I'm like, well, should I change it to this? And he's like, you know, basically how you were already talking about, like turning the heater on and off, on and off, on and off. Like for some reason, I couldn't wrap my head around why it wouldn't work. And he's like, a little bit of a translation, obviously with two different languages or whatever, a little bit of a translation issue. And he was like sent screenshots galore, but like I read up and he was talking about like he uses Profilux on like an industrial scale of like
Yep.
public aquaria and stuff like that. And I was like, no kidding. I was like,
Yeah.
hey, if it's working, if it's that's kind of like when like I was telling you about, like I know money doesn't equate success, but I'd rather put my money into tried and true in quality products versus, I've already had 20 years of throwing money away. You know what I mean? So, I mean, I'm happy. I'd like to maybe delve a little deeper into more of what it can do, but at the same time, like I'm apprehensive about it because I'm like, oh, oh shoot, if I change this and it doesn't do that and it does something else, and kind of like when we were discussing yesterday about I want to put the caulk stirrer online because I'm looking at my pH value since January 1st, and I'm like an average of 8.1. And I'm like, oh, I'd really like, if I could get it up to the 8.3, 8.4 on a steady, maybe that half-inch piece that's been sitting in my tank for the last year doing nothing will actually start to sprout some legs. And, I'm like, I just don't, for some reason, I can't wrap my head around like how to set it up. Like I had it set up on one of the single heads from the Doso 2.1, pulling water from the ATO, but then I wasn't sure how many milliliters should I dose, through a set schedule throughout the day, or am I not thinking to set it up that way? Should I set it up, maybe get rid of the tons of auto top off and use float sensors and then just pull from the ATO into the reactor that way? And I talk to Chris on a pretty much daily basis, and he's like, what part don't you understand? He's like, dude, he's like, and then I put a post up today about like people that are running caulk stirrers and for just the added pH benefit.
Yeah.
And it's like the most simple solution, but I complicate the hell out of everything. I think a little too deep, like, because, and again, based off our conversation yesterday, like, regardless, the pH has been an average of 8.1 since January 1st. Things are growing. The tank actually looks good again for a change, and it has been for a little while. Like, I don't want to start playing around. And my luck, it shits the bed, and then I'm like, that's it. That's the key. I'm out. I'm selling everything, because it's heartbreaking when things go downhill,
Oh, absolutely. Takes so long to build it up and just a few seconds to tear it down.
Yeah. Shared the photo yesterday. I shared it with these guys as well. That a friend of mine, he's paralyzed from the chest down, and I was like, listen, I have an old tank, some hodgepodge equipment, and he's got the hand checker, and he's like, oh, I got to order new filters for. He's got like the Aquatic Life RO buddy under his sink, and he's like, it's not making water. And I'm like, when's the last time you use it? And he's like, I ordered new filters in a membrane. It's coming tomorrow. So I'm like, I'll bring salt, fresh made salt water. I'll bring it over or whatever. And I went over there, and there was like a 1/16 of an inch layer across the sand bed of uneaten TDO pellets. And I'm like, dude, how much food are you feeding this tank? You got two tiny fish. And he's like, they don't eat the food. I go, so then why the hell do you continue feeding the tank? Try a different type of food, And he's like, I don't know. He's like, my daughter comes over, dumps a handful of food. And like, I just put the siphon hose into the sand, and it came out thick, black, nasty mud. And I'm like, bro, he killed all his invertebrates, like, got a couple of pajama coddles still in there alive. And I'm like, I sent him like BRS TV videos. I'm like, hooked them up on the forum. I'm like, dude, read this, watch this, watch this. And I mean, I don't think it's in his cards, unfortunately, but and he was upset about it yesterday. And I said, maybe this is a good opportunity for you to actually learn. You're not getting a turnkey system. Pull your rocks out, try them on the sidewalk, and bleach them, acid dip them, whatever. Start fresh. That way you get the basics like we all had to go through, So we'll see. We'll see what happens. He's already asking me about like Scolamia coral and shit. And I'm like, bro, he literally can't keep his own leather coral alive. I'm like, what? But to each your own, I guess. But I don't know. Yeah. That's really all I have for questions, in terms of like, how'd you get into reef keeping and that type of stuff? Do you want to show us a bit of your equipment possibly, and maybe some of the amazing corals you get behind you?
Sure, we'll start
or not. I don't want, you don't have to do anything you don't want to do. I don't want to twist your arm or,
Well, I've already shown the tank behind me, so what the heck? Let's show the rest of it.
I like to see all the goodies, the infrastructure. The corals are cool too, but I like to see the gadgetry.
All right, so let's start with that. Let me turn this around 1 second.
Awesome. Appreciate it.
All right, so that's the part of the equipment area. So I've got, this is the standard Red Sea plumbing. And this is the Bubble King skimmer that I've had since, oh boy, probably 7 years.
Game changers,
And
right? The
yeah,
Bubble Kings.
I have no reason to change it. It's a workhorse. It just keeps going and going. So I brought it with me even during my move from Connecticut to California. I couldn't let it go.
I was going to get one for this system, but I didn't like the price tag, and so I ended up getting a Reef Octopus. Basically the same design, but I mean it works. But everyone I talk to that has a Bubble King, they're like, you will never use another skimmer again.
It's true.
So we'll see what happens the next one,
Yeah, it's a hefty price to swallow, but once you've bought it, yeah, it's just there and it does well. So I've got also all these dosing lines. They're all labeled. So yeah, there's quite a bit going into the tank. They've got, like I said earlier, calcium, alk, mag, 3 trace elements. I have a line for auto top off. Then I've got my nitrate reducing liquid, and then also dosing something else. I forgot what else I'm dosing. What else? Yeah, you guys can see I've got my cabinet lighting in here that I that I installed when this tank went up. I bought the waterproof ones because I know skimmer overflows, they're inevitable. It's going to happen sooner or later. so I bought the waterproof LED lights. They are
sorry.
Yeah, they're controlled by the Proflux. I have these little relay switches here, little magnetic contact switches. I mean, so every time I open the door, lights turn on. And this, I don't know if you guys can see it. This is the breakout board that's connected directly to the controller. So if I wanted to, I can connect other contact switches or other accessories to it and have the Proflux control it. The other thing that's connected to this breakout board is my float switch that goes in the skimmer cup. So whenever the cup gets full, the controller will cut the power to the skimmer. And whenever I need to clean out the cup, I'll just disconnect it. That'll also turn off the skimmer to let me do what I need to do to it. And once it's ready, I just reinstall it, connect the cables, and it's good to go. And and I also have my water change line for the new water probes. Probes are down there. I don't know if you guys can see it.
Yeah.
And for a return pump, I'm using the Abyss A100. That's another pump that I had with me probably 6 years. Also carried over from my last tank when I was in Connecticut. That's the most quietest pump I have ever heard. Yeah, and then I've got my dosing tubes for my the ion director and the KH director. So that's that. And then last but not least, we've got a webcam in here. So whenever I travel, I just log in and I can always check up on the sump. So I can this is like it's almost like a near 360 rotation camera. So I could just log in, I could see if the skimmer is overflowing or if the cup is full. I can also just pan down and see if the filter socks need to be the filter floss needs to be changed. This camera I just added about 7 or 8 months ago. That's the most recent addition to the electronic side of the tank.
That's so smart. I feel like I see a ton of webcams on the display tank, but it's like all the equipment, all the real stuff is happening down there. So it's really smart.
Yeah. This has it hasn't been a lifesaver, knock on wood. But it's just something that's always good to have. I feel like everyone should have one. If you have a tank and you have space to put into this little camera, you just can't go wrong with it.
Do you happen to know is it a Foss cam or is it, some other brand or anything specific or?
This is by, I want to say TP Link.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you look them up, yeah.
I have a Nest camera on my, like when you come into the room and it, obviously it's not basically it's not focused on the equipment. It's just more broad, but I'd love to get, something else. If I ever do make it out of the house and go out and stuff, I'm usually always checking my thing. My buddies would be like, dude, why are you always on your phone? And I'm like, I'm monitoring my system. If things go bad, like I need to be able to call someone and be like, hey, do this, do that, like there's water spilling on the floor, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. All right. So now we look at the heart of the tank where all the control happens. So we've got the Proflux controller. That's the brains of the system. And then we've got the dosing pumps. That's dosing the alkalinity calcium mag, and then the nitrate reducing liquid. And we've got the ion director. So this one's doing calcium, mag, potassium, sodium, and nitrate. And I've got this pump head that I haven't found any use for it yet, but maybe one day I will. And then the KH director for alkalinity. And right now, I don't know if you guys can see, but I've got the ATO pump is running right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
So that is what's under this cabinet. So now we can look at the next cabinet.
That's awesome.
So here's where yeah, these IKEA cabinets have come in handy. There's so much equipment that I needed to find a way to nicely store everything, keeping it out of sight. So I've got another dosing pump. These take care of the trace elements. Okay. So one trace element is for reds, the other's for green, and the other's for blue corals. This clear bottle used to be amino acids, but the bottle ran empty, and I didn't see much of an added benefit to dosing it, so I just stopped. And then I've got my containers back there for the alkalinity, calcium, and the mag, and my ATO reservoir. I know it's kind of dark, but yeah, maybe you can see it. Yeah, and this reservoir will last me about 8 days. 8 days during the summertime. And then I just have to manually refill it. I'll just run the line from the RO unit, fill it up, and it's filled in about 90 minutes. Yeah. So that's the second cabinet. Now we can look at the third. This is where the water change happens. So that's the 2.2 Maxi. That's the newer dosing pump that GHL has. So this is what handles the water change. One pump is for removing the old water. The other pump is for putting in the new water. That new water comes from this reservoir. It holds about 15 gallons. And like I said earlier, whenever any of these containers, whether we're talking about the water change reservoir or the ATO pump or any of the containers, anytime those containers start to run empty, I'll get a ping from the controller to my phone, and it'll tell me, hey, it's time to refill. Yep. So that's that. And let me put on the filter so you can see the tank better.
Do you do the email notifications, or are you running push notifications, or
I do
and or
both.
both?
I do both. I mean, the option's there, so may as well use it.
Right.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Vinny, dare I ask what the street value of the controller components is, not including lights and, just like the controller and its modules that you have running?
If you were to do the mega set, you'd be looking at about 960. That mega set is the head unit, your 6-outlet power strip, which I couldn't show you because it's behind this area. 6-outlet power strip, 4 probes, pH, temperature, salinity, redox, and your calibration fluids. So that's what you'll get for 960. As far as other modules and accessories, it really depends on what exactly you want to do. Most people will end up wanting to pick up an optical sensor or float switch. If you want a float switch, it's about a $40 piece. Once you have that connected to the controller, you could use it for managing your auto top off. If you wanted to use, let's say, a dosing pump as a way to top off the tank, then the question becomes, well, how much water do you think you'll evaporate? In this tank will evaporate about a gallon a day, which is enough for these little pumps to handle. But if it was anything more than, let's say, like about a gallon and a half, then I'd say these motors are too small. Even though they'll be able to do the job, it's just going to run for so long that it's just going to put more wear and tear on the motors. You'll find yourself likely cleaning out these caps more often than you'd like. So if the tank is going to go through more than a gallon and a half a day, that's where the Maxi comes in. Because this, by comparison, will put out about 10 times the flow rate. So this puts out about 350, 360 mils a minute, whereas the smaller doser will put out anywhere between 35 and 40 mils. So this is much more suitable for ATO and water changes. If you wanted to do, let's say, one of the smaller dosing pumps, and you already have a controller, then you'd be looking at about 400 for the extension model. And then if you end up needing the bigger doser, that in itself is about 350. Also the extension model. Yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
Do you run are they all your doses and stuff, you run them as standalone, or you run them as slave, or benefit of one versus the other?
The Maxi doser is a native standalone, but I have it set to extension mode because I would rather just tie it all into the Profilux rather than having 2 separate devices to connect to. So the other dosers that's down here, those are all extensions. We renamed it. It used to be called Slave, but now they're just called extension units. So yeah, these are all extension units. That Maxi is a standalone converted into an extension mode. And as far as the benefits and drawbacks, the obvious benefit is if something were to go south with the controller unit itself, then you still have a doser that you can just switch it back to standalone mode and use it. The upside of having a extension unit is not having to switch it to extension mode. You just tie it into the Profilux and you just run with it. Yeah.
I have a
Quick question.
Go ahead,
no,
Dylan. No, go ahead. Mine's useless information.
I saw on your skimmer, you had your air intake hooked up to some pipe. Are you doing CO2 scrubbing or just hooked up to outside air?
I use a CO2 scrubber, and whenever the pH drops below a certain point, the controller will notify me, and that'll tell me the media is already exhausted and it needs to be replaced. The media I replace every 6 weeks, every 6 or 7 weeks.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Think looks
Yeah.
great.
Thanks. Yeah, as you can see, this is primarily acros, with the exception of a few LPS here and there.
So clean. No, fermented snails taking over there in California.
Not in this tank.
Yeah, I seem to scrape them out left and right.
I,
I'm like, what the hell is going on? But
I finally got a handle on mine.
oh, nice.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I know
Almost.
dealing with dermatids are a nightmare.
that's like poor Chris. We'll swap coral back and forth or whatever, and be like, dude, I can Filoni here all of a sudden. I'm like, didn't come from my tank that's loaded with it. Now we're gonna Aptasia. I'm like, you're welcome. Whatever, 2 years ago, not anymore. But the question I had for you regarding like expansion cards, Vinny. I mean, I'm sure I could click on them. I added one a while ago so I can control pH in my calcium reactor. Now, if I wanted to, of course, I don't know which one I added. It was either PLM, pH, redox, conductivity one or whatever. If I were to get another pH probe, I'd probably have to get another like add-on card, right? To like maybe monitor pH in the caulk stirrer.
If you want to monitor a caulk stir, I would use a conductivity probe.
Yeah.
I know Devin from Reef Dudes, he made a video several months back and he showed how he uses that type of probe for a
Okay.
caulk stir. Because what happens is concentrated calc is going to have a crazy high pH, and
Mhm.
that's going to be higher than what the controller will actually show you.
Okay.
Whereas when you're dealing with a conductivity probe, it's within the readable range of the probe.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yes. Yep. And these are the lights. These are the Mitros LX7s. There's two models. This is the 7206 with the 6 clusters, and then there's the 7204 with 4 clusters. And there's 3 of them here. These were also brought over from my last tank.
Yes.
I brought over a lot of equipment with me when I made the move because I knew it wasn't going to be long until I got back in the hobby.
There's never a long-term break, it seems like.
No. Yeah, and these are the cooling fans. So these are also controlled by the Proflux. So whenever the temperature climbs to, I believe I have it set to 80, the fans kick on. If the temperature continues climbing, let's say to 80.5 or 81 or even higher, the fan speeds will gradually ramp up higher and higher and higher to increase the cooling capability of the fan.
Nice.
So yeah, and that's
Are
all.
you,
Yeah.
Are you still running the same program for your lights?
Yeah. It
Yeah.
hasn't changed.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's the same program. With the exception of I have been experimenting with it a little bit. I've been pumping up the UV, but that's really about it. Other than that, it's unchanged.
Okay.
Yeah, Chris is our one of our resident GHL guys.
Nice.
Him and Nick,
Mhm.
Chris has got one of everything. I can't wait.
No, I got more than one of everything. Almost.
He just needs a bigger
Um,
tank now.
I know.
Yeah,
Ion
like
Direct.
the rest of us.
When is that ever going to get the phosphate? 'Cause that's what's
First,
holding me back from that.
yeah. First, the sensors have to be
Yep.
shipped out. There was a little delay in Germany with them having to wait for the chemicals because
Okay.
these probes are so customized, you're not going to find it anywhere else. So there's proprietary chemicals that have to be injected into the sensors. Those chemicals didn't come in when they were supposed to, so that's what held back the production. There were some sensors that went out already, but there were so many that had to be produced that they needed to order in more chemicals for it. Those came in already, so production's ramping up again, and we should see a wave of sensors hit the US anytime in the next 2-3 weeks. And after we're caught up with fulfilling the customers who have an ion director, then we could move forward with actually packaging the entire ion director sets. So it's not a discontinued product, as I've heard out there, but it's going to be relaunched once we've caught up with the sensors.
But is it going to be testing phosphate or at all, or
Phosphate, that's to be seen.
phosphorus? Yeah.
Yeah, that's
I know it's a
what
complicated
phosphate is
thing.
one of those. It's super, super complicated because you need a level of precision that really pushes the boundaries of what's technologically possible. So yeah.
Are you running the GHL wave makers on your tank? Looks like you've got some good flow.
That was
Yeah,
gonna
the
be my
wave
question.
the wave makers that I have right now are the Vortec MP40s. I do actually have the wave makers here.
Oh, yeah.
I haven't gotten around to setting it up yet, but they will be going on the tank maybe in a couple weeks or so. So these are the Versia streams. So they're very, very small, very compact. They put out about 2,200 gallons an hour. I'm going to put these in the back corners, just keep them tucked away so they're not really noticeable. I'm not a fan of putting power heads on the side glasses, the side walls of the tank. I like to just keep everything as tucked away as possible.
Me too. I like them to blend into the back wall.
Yeah.
I'll send you a picture later of my big chunky tunsies friggin' all over the side panels.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just moved some to the back, shooting forward just for that reason. It's friggin' an eyesore. But I don't know. See what happens.
Yeah, as long as
Anybody
they
have?
do the job.
Yeah. Dude, honestly, I don't know if it's just time of growth or whatever. But since I have tons of these 6095s and, I have 4 of them in a 4-foot tank. So I just took 2 off the sides and mounted from the back glass to the front glass.
Yep.
And just for different flow rate, or different schedule or whatnot. I've seen an influx in growth and I'm like, well, who knows, is it coincidence or is it just, the coral's hitting that type of strive. So who knows? Definitely get more flow, front to back, obviously, but than going across a 4-footer. But I don't know. I'm excited. I'm excited for all sorts of gadgetry and goodies. I'm gonna go on my Amazon shopping cart and start friggin' looking at random shit that I don't need.
Yeah, GHL has a good amount of products in the pipeline once the ion director becomes a regular shipping product. We've already announced a few of them, but we haven't put out too much other information, only because the focus right now is the ion director.
Right.
But other products, in case you guys haven't heard, is there will be a fish feeder at one point. So that's going to tie into the Profilux. And there's also going to be an SMS module. So anybody who wants to get text messages directly from their tank, in case of an actual power outage, the SMS module will come in handy for exactly that. There's also going to be a heating and cooling product that we announced it back in, I want to say 2019, and then COVID happened, and that pushed everything back. The product is called PTC2. It stands for Profilux Temperature Control. It's like I said earlier, it's a heating and cooling device. So you tie it into your return line, or you hook up a dedicated feed pump to it, and it will heat your water, and it will also cool it. That also runs in line with the Profilux controller, and we're going to have it in 5 different sizes. So depending on the tank that you have and how much cooling capacity you need, you could just daisy chain multiple of these devices together and basically eliminate the need for a chiller. Stage 1 cooling would be your your fans, like the propeller breeze, and then stage 2 would be your PTC2 if it ends up needing additional cooling.
You know, I bought the Tunzi cables to control my
Oh,
power heads
okay. Mhm.
like 2 years ago, probably. They're all hooked up, but I never plugged them into the back of the profile because I'm like, I'll get around to it. They've been sitting like dangling for, a year and a half, 2 years now. I'm like, one of these, but I mounted, the controller for the actual Tunzi, like in a way that I gotta get down on my hands and knees, and they're like out of sight, out of mind. You know what I mean? And I know from like reading with like Lass or Ditto or some of the other, users like on Reef to Reef, like each one doesn't give out the same like volt reading off the controller itself. So you gotta like, say you set the stream group or whatever, 3 volts, but this Tanzi controller might not actually turn on until 4 volts and shit, so that's kind of my lazy excuse for not connecting it. But
yeah, you can work with that still. Yeah, you just go to the 1 to 10 volt interface, set the minimum to 3 volts, max to 8, and that falls in line with whatever variations in voltage the Tunzi pumps have.
Yeah.
Just set it to 3 and 8.
We'll see what happens.
And get it connected.
Hey, you guys heard it first. Vinny said between 3 and 8. So if my tank shits the bed next week,
Recorded here.
we're coming for you. No, I'm just kidding. But, I don't know. So anyone have any questions for Mr. Vinny here?
Vinny, you said you moved from Connecticut to California. Did you bring any fish with you from your last tank, or is everything kind of new when you got out there?
I broke down everything. I took the equipment that was on the old tank. I brought it with me. I sold off. I sold off, I'd say 90% of the coral. 10% I had a few buddies of mine hold on to it, and none of them kept it alive. so that didn't work out as planned. But yeah, when I came here, I bought the new tank. I talked with Kyle from Adaptive Reef. I told him these are the equipment that I want to have in the cabinet. Can you please build me something that will work with it? He said, yeah, sure. So he sent me that, and and then I just put in all the equipment. So most of what's here is what was bought while I was here, with the exception of the controller, the dosing pumps, and the lights.
What rock did you go with?
I went with Marco rocks. It was my very first time that I messed around with the dead rock. In the past, I've only dealt with live rock, but nowadays, getting your hand on legitimate live rock is kind of hard. And if you can find it, it's outrageously priced.
Yeah, there's a kid in Long Island, Jason Giannis. He runs Pristine Marine or something like that. He brings an Australian live rock, and it's stupid good looking, but it's $25 a pound.
Yeah,
I'm like, I've been telling him, the next system I set up, because it's some really cool, almost like Tonga branch pieces.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I can't wait. But then, I was just on his website the other day, and I was like, 100 pounds of rock. I mean, it's, $3,000-$4,000 at that point. I'm like, come on, man.
It's so hard to justify at that point.
Crazy.
I remember the days when I used to be able to walk into an LFS in Connecticut, pick up some Fiji rock or some Tonga or some Pukani rock, $7, $8, $9 a pound. It was still expensive for me because I think I was still like 16, 17 years old.
Yeah.
But the options were plentiful. But nowadays, those days are long gone. So yeah, this tank was set up with Marco rock, and that took like a year and a half to really get through the ugly stage.
Yeah. My system now, it's a mix of like 15-year-old Fiji rock and a bunch of, it's probably a 50-50 split, and same thing, dry rock, and I let it soak. Obviously I didn't let it soak long enough, and I'm texting guys, and I'm like, dude, I've seen algae growing out of this thing that I've never seen in my life, and it was probably a good solid 10 months to a year before, the uglies went away. But
that rock will really test your patience.
Fun fact, Mark Tatro got a start in Boston Reefers 100 years ago. He used to live down at Cape Cod, had a store down there, and and I mean, Scavo has more information about that, but it's cool. So, crazy how things start. But do you have any pros and cons on moving from the East Coast to the West Coast? That's for Mr. Dillon. He's about to move to California.
Literally Connecticut to California too. Yeah, it's funny.
Yeah. You picking NorCal or SoCal?
SoCal, I'm gonna be in Los Angeles. Yeah.
Okay.
Whereabouts
All
are
right.
you?
I'm in NorCal. I'm in San Jose.
Nice. Okay.
So,
yeah.
so the downside from moving from Connecticut is the higher cost of living.
Mhm.
Everywhere you turn, everything just costs a lot more. Yeah. Even the corals, surprisingly, are more
Crazy.
expensive, even though California, from what I hear, usually gets first dibs over anyone else in the US. Yet it's still more
That
expensive.
was kind of my train of thought too.
It doesn't make any sense to me, but that's just how it is.
Yeah.
And so sometimes when I travel back to visit family in Connecticut, I'll drop by a few of the LFSs and I'll pick up a few pieces. I'll bring them right back with me on the plane because doing that is still less expensive than buying pieces, from a local shop here.
Wow.
That's crazy. You ever have any issues with TSA or anything trying to bring corals on the planes?
Oh, they've stopped me plenty of times.
Yeah.
The main thing is just to have that piece of paper that shows them their rules and say and just be upfront with them. Just say, hey, I've got this piece of paper. It says it's okay because it's a live animal. I've had a few instances where they were really not wanting to read the paper with their own rules.
Yeah.
And they tried to get me to throw it away. And I had a nice 2-inch acro in there. So it needed a decent amount of water, well over 3.4 ounces. And they told me, you really can't pour more water out of the bag. And I told them, no, it's like a fish.
Yeah.
What happens to the fish if it doesn't have enough water to swim? It dies. So it's the same thing, same idea.
That's crazy.
And then her supervisor overheard, and I explained to her what it was and why we needed to have that much water, and she said, "Okay, you're okay." But
I've done the opposite. I've flown from California to Connecticut with fish and coral actually. Only one time, but it was a pretty decent experience, Did my homework beforehand, like you said, got the rules and
yeah.
And I had a, pretty good experience the first time. They just pulled me aside, looked at everything. But yeah, it worked out. I'm excited to be out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, Dylan dropped some corals off over here, and he's like, once I get set up, he's like, you ship some stuff out to me. I'm like, yeah, no problem. Little does he know, everything's gonna die in my tank. No,
he's gonna sell them all for a profit.
Nah, I know. I got some nice stuff in there. Somebody's supposed to come by tonight. Some newer hobbyist, friend of a friend, and he hit me up early, and he's like, hey, can I drop some coral off in your tank? And I'm like, I mean, I only get coral mainly 99% of the time from the same person. You know what I mean? And like, I trust his system enough where sometimes I don't dip stuff from his tank only because he's got like a legitimate 100 grand worth of acro in a 90 gallon tank. And I'm like, I brought him a piece like an old, like Tyree Monty Stellata or Ondata or whatever, that I got from Keith Berkelhammer. And he's like, oh, it's such a classic coral. He's like, can you bring me a piece? So I cut him a good 4x4 chunk. And he's like, should I dip it? And I was like, I don't dip your coral, dude, but I don't know, you might want to dip mine, and but yeah, this kid was like, he just got a 40 breeder or something, you set up, but he had a 32 BioCube with like the stock hood, and he's like, he's got Scolamia and Duncans and all this stuff. And I'm like, I'll tell you what I tell everyone, there's no guarantees. And I'm gonna dip the hell out of that thing and I'm gonna inspect it. So it might not even make it into my system because I'm not willing to take the chance. And he's like, why are you gonna be like that? And I'm like, dude, the amount of money I get invested in time, it's not worth it. Like you can take it home in a bowl for all I care,
Yeah.
He's supposedly coming by tonight at 9. I'm like, maybe I'll shut the lights off and pretend no one's home. Scumbag. I'm just kidding. Yeah, I'm cool, man. I don't know if anyone else has any questions or discussion or anything like that. For Mr. Vinny here. Wealth of knowledge. I'm truly honored, to have you, and I'm glad that you did agree to this. I wish it wasn't July, and unfortunately, like I was saying yesterday, there's a lot of people that just don't reef during the summer months. I mean,
Mhm.
I'd like to maybe get to that automation level where I can go out and do more things, and not really reef during the summer either. But I mean, I always come back to it. Realistically, I'm better off sitting at home. There's nothing good out there on a Friday night. So with that, I thank you, on behalf of Boston Reefers. Definitely appreciate you agreeing to do this and talk a little bit with us and chew the fat and whatever other terminology you want to use. So I thank you again. And
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me again, Paul.
you're included on our giveaway wheel. I'm gonna spin the wheel. I added the names. Josh, I didn't include you. You haven't been here that long, unfortunately. Just kidding. So I'm gonna try to share my screen and see if you win something fancy, Vinny. Can you guys see this thing?
Yep, we can see it.
Ready? Is it spinning?
Yep.
Oh no, it can't be this guy. Chris A.
It's,
Are you kidding me? All right, Chris, I'll have to get with you with
Ooh,
you want to
how do I
give it.
always win everything? I don't get it.
Dude, let me tell you something, Vinny, about Chris A. How do I unshare my screen? Here we go with technology. Great. Anyway, I'm lost at the moment. Where is stop share? The joys of having multiple windows and tabs, I guess. Yeah, Chris wins everything. Not just here, like I'm sure you're familiar with Jay Moran or whatever from out in California. He used to have like the Ask Real Reefers Facebook thing.
Yep.
Chris would win stuff. He won an Alcatronic. He won, XR30s. Like everything and anything. Like he wins it all. He won the Mitras at our show last November, and whatever. I mean, these guys know I kind of touch base or whatever. Lack of funds, I think I bought $50 in tickets. I was like, I'm gonna win that Mitras, right? I was 2 friggin' numbers off. Guess who won? Mr. Chris. So now he's got 2 7206s over a 40 breeder and another one that's going to be on his new sump upgrade, frag system until he gets his 800-gallon tank going. But yeah, I'd just like to thank you again. I greatly do appreciate it, and hope to see you out here more on the East Coast than the West Coast. But
Yeah.
Thank you again.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, guys.
If you guys want to still chat
Vinny.
and all that good stuff, Vinny, you don't have to go. I'm not kicking you out, but I'm just I'm good on my end. I'm kind of rambling like an idiot as usual. So
Thanks a lot, Vinny. Really appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks again, guys.
Anytime, guys. Anytime. If you guys have any questions about anything, just feel free to shoot me a DM on Instagram. I'll be happy to help.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
All right.
Thanks, Vinny. Take care.
Thanks.
Take it easy, guys. Have a good weekend.
You too.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
You too.